So hello everyone. My name is Andrew Tyrer. I'm a lead specialist at the Technology Strategy Board. We don't refer to ourselves as the TSB for obvious reasons, especially with an audience like this. But the Technology Strategy Board itself has been around. Actually, it was our 5th birthday yesterday. So we're funded from the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, and effectively we're the innovation agency of the UK. Prior to the demise of the regional development agencies, they did a lot of innovation work as well, but really we're now the only main funder in the UK from a government perspective, driving innovation. And over the last 5 years we've invested about £1.25 billion of government funding into businesses, and normally that's 50% funded, so therefore there's been over £2.5 billion of investment. For my sins, I've invested with UK businesses about £25–26 million of that. So over £50 million of activity into cyber security, network security. And quite often that's been around the financial services sector. And I'll just go through what I think around the issues around identity are. I'm not going to try and solve the problems, because we don't solve problems at TSB. We pose those challenges to industry and get industry to help work with its communities, with academia, with end users to try and solve some of these challenges. So we don't prescribe challenges just to do things in a disruptive manner. We actually provide challenges so that innovation can actually help from a growth agenda. So we're about actually making money for UK PLC. So in terms of who do you think you are from an identity perspective, it's a very confusing landscape nowadays. And I don't just mean that from a financial services perspective. But in terms of how many identities do you think you have, no one can exist with one digital identity nowadays. And actually, quite often you could say our digital identity is probably more important than our physical identity in terms of transacting. It's very hard nowadays to transact as an individual without a digital identity. Whenever you sign up to anything, everyone wants to know your mobile phone number, they want to know your email address, they want to know all about you. Quite often they want to know about you for things that actually they don't need to carry out a transaction at the same time. But we have these various personas, be it in work, in play, at home, our online identities. It's a very confusing landscape. So, how many things do we actually require for, an identity? And most of the tokens or the things we use for identities nowadays weren't actually designed for that purpose. So, be it our driving license, or things like this, all these different things that provide your identity you might use to, log into a smartphone. You might have you put an identity, your email number in. Even PCs and TVs now require some sort of logins quite often. If you think of the Internet of Things and how everything's starting to be connected, all those things need an identity. So it might be an IP address, it might be a log on, it might be a sign on. But more and more nowadays we're being asked who we are. And quite often being asked who we are, not because they really need to know, just because they're being nosy. So if you think you own your own data, I think you're probably mistaken. Tesco's probably know more about my eating habits than I think I do because of a club card system. So they could potentially use that for, if they wanted to, for my life insurance, for instance. If I consume several bottles of wine a week, which obviously don't, but if I did, they could take that into account. So it's very difficult about how do you use data that's provided during all these identities and how you might stitch those together. And so there is obviously regulation around that. But the issue is that quite often the market's moving so fast that you don't really know what people are collecting for on your behalf, or is it on your behalf? That's the real problem. So in terms of, you thinking that all these different tokens, and I've just listed a few that I thought of when I was putting this slide together, utility bills, DVLA records, banks, phones, people ask you for all these things to prove who you are, but none of those things were actually meant for that entitlement. It's very important to know that. So for instance, when government was talking about having an ID card, and obviously that's been well scrapped now, but that was about having a root identity. But actually the feeling we have in the marketplace and all the companies I work with nowadays is that probably root identities don't and shouldn't exist. And actually it's amalgamation of all your different identities all networked together that enable you to have more confidence in your ability to transact, because people can build a picture up about you and a confidence level of who are you and how you might actually react to that transaction. May you pay your bill or access a service. And that's no different if you're transacting with an online government service, put your tax return in, or doing your DVLA returns for your tax for your car, to interacting with your bank or your mobile phone company, or buying something off Amazon or eBay. So the question is, I suppose, and more, why not the PayPals, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Moshi monsters. You know, I mean, children now are having to provide, transactions in terms of, sort of financial transactions. Only last week I signed up to my smartphone for my system, and actually on terms and conditions, you had to be 11 to sign up to the actual final transaction with NatWest on my mobile phone. So therefore, if I was 11, I could now go to a cash point, pull money out just using my phone. Don't need a card. You know, it's those sort of things we're putting in place now, where actually people are growing up with digital services. Obviously, the liability models behind those are quite different. And I'm sure when I signed my daughter's, okay to sign a bank account several years ago, in that small print it says I'm liable for that in some way. So there is a liability issue here. But the issue is that confusing a landscape, and you might be, starting to use your Facebook account to sign into services elsewhere that have got nothing to do with Facebook. So effectively, they're becoming an identity broker. And so what's happening is we're starting to have identity brokers emerge who are third parties, who aren't necessarily involved in the transaction apart from proving who you are and you've got entitlement to access a service. And those identity brokers, the people like the banks and the credit reference agencies, of course, have got a lot of information on you, so therefore they are a good start to provide broking services. But actually, I think lots of services are starting to emerge, and some of the projects we funded are around actually the formation of those services. So it's people coming together saying that, all I'm going to do is look after your identity. And actually you can start to trade that because that's worth money to people. If you're a qualified sales lead for buying a car and people can prove you've got a good credit rating and a history, apparently people will pay good money for that type of information. So actually you as an individual can start to leverage your data and your identity as well. Actually it's something that Biz are working on, something called My Data, about how do you actually use your data out there. So data out in the wild, how do you gain control of that and actually use it out in the economy to help you as an individual, rather than it just helping the organisation who tracks where you are every day of the week, either via your transactions or your GPS or whatever they might do. So in terms of what we need to do from a technology strategy board perspective, because we're there to drive innovation, we're there to, obviously, from a growth agenda, not only to increase wealth, but also from a network security perspective, where I live and reside on a day-to-day basis, is actually reducing financial and technical risk as well. So there's a cost-saving element. So, for instance, if you're looking at Ford in the UK, huge figures, obviously, underwritten by, I suppose, by us as customers, eventually we pay, but underwritten by financial organisations. So if you can spend good money there and actually stop fraud occurring, then obviously that's as good as, earning more money on a balance sheet, because obviously it is going to save you money, and therefore you can be more effective as a business. So basically, in terms of disruption in the marketplace and emerging markets, obviously the digital market is moving at pace. So there's no good having traditional R&D type activities. You want to work with a lot of small organisations and companies, but also allow them to exploit those technologies into large organisations. So a lot of what we do is about brokering those relationships. So even though some of our funding might go into some large organisations, quite often it's actually enabling smaller SMEs to exploit their IP in those organisations. So very much about joining up the business landscape. And quite often that means that a good example would be from an organisation we supported a couple of years ago in the gaming sector, who's very good at 3D visualization, worked with another SME in a network security company who was very good at modelling networks. And together they've now formed a new company which has brought those two competencies together. And actually now have a good SME. It's got £1 million of VC funding. It's got 12 employees, all from a few £100,000 of investment from themselves. So a good example of what can be done. So in terms of enabling that collaboration, obviously we also look at back to government as well. So because we're an agency within government, even though we're not civil servants, public servants, we are business focused. But also we look at where legislation potentially can change the market. Not so much that we've done so far in the financial services, but certainly if you look at the carbon economy, low carbon economy, we've been able to do that. So some of our activities have been targeted at those issues. But also where we do work in financial markets, if you look at some of the things we do actually address the financial services industry. It just won't say it on the tin. It won't say at the top of the page, we're actually supporting financial services. But actually we are, if you look underneath the cover. So if you look at the type of activity where I've got a competition opening July the 9th, so next week, it's around actually how do you innovate in cloud services, how do you provide services in the cloud. And actually if you look at the three main things there, we're targeting this call out about interoperability of service. So if you're a cloud provider, how do you pull in and out of services, how do you don't get tied into people? It's a very big issue. It's, because if you just move from an IT provider to a cloud provider, it doesn't help if your SLA is still the same. So it's actually been about more agile in the marketplace, enabling SMEs to come in and work with you on a local level. It's also about how do you make sure that data is resilient. So where is it stored? How is it stored? How do I know when it's been deleted? It's been deleted. All sort of issues that are very key to the financial services sector. And then, last but by no means least, it's around the identity assurance. So that's about the ability to know who you're transacting with, and that the person has the authority to take forward that transaction, and to give you some certainty and to reduce your risk from a financial services perspective. But actually doing it at a level that you just need to know they have that. You don't need to know their birthday if you're just transacting. You just need to know you have a valid transaction. You don't need to know what their address is if you're buying a coffee, or if you're buying a beer and want to know you're old enough. You just need to know you have the authorization to transact at that level. And so what we're trying to do is help develop systems that just do that, and so it's fit for purpose in this fast-changing world. So it's just a quick snapshot of what we're doing at Technology Strategy Board. I'm very happy to speak to you. Obviously, I'll be around this afternoon. Just one little extra thing. I haven't put it up on a slide because it's not wholly official yet, but I'm working with the Forum for Innovation in Crime Prevention, got a title there, but it's a Home Office forum looking at crime prevention in m-commerce, and we've got some of the large organisations in here, I won't name them, but our members, from banks to telcos to retail industry players, trying to look at actually how we engage and with m-commerce and mobile phone, smartphone technologies prevailing now, actually is that going to be a playground for the criminal, or can we protect the citizen? And the citizen I'd like to protect to start with is really not like the iPhone users in the middle, but it's actually the people who get scammed now. So the elderly, the blind, disadvantaged parts of the population. So what we're looking to do is invest with technologies that will prevent that fraud from the handset end of things, from the mobile commerce aspect, not the back office that John will talk about, but actually from the front end with the usability, the GUI at the front end, make sure it's fit for purpose. So that's something we'll be launching hopefully in the next few months. So just a quick snapshot of what we're doing, where we're about. As I said, I would reinforce that quite often it doesn't say financial services at the front, but actually if you look under the cover, the scope of what we're talking about this afternoon in that call, for instance, means that there's £4.5 million of investment. So normally that would be £9 million of activity looking at areas that concern you, and would welcome yourselves as a community to get involved.